The CEO didn't bother learning my name before firing me. He didn't ask what I did, what I built, or why the board had insisted I be present for his first day welcome address. He just glanced at my badge, scoffed at the title printed under it, and said the words he must have practiced in the mirror that morning: "Legacy roles won't exist under my leadership. You're done here." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even blink. I just watched him, this 30-something golden boy with a trust fund jawline and a consultancy-polished ego, as he swung the hammer at a foundation he didn't even understand. He had been hired to modernize, to streamline, to energize the culture, which was corporate speak for getting rid of anyone who actually knew how the company worked. So I nodded, handed security my badge, and walked out of the building I had more right to than he ever would. Because what the CEO didn't know, and what the board never thought to mention, was that I wasn't an employee. Not really. I was an owner. A quiet one. A hidden one. A 67% majority shareholder whose name was buried under a private trust formed 3 decades ago when the company was nothing more than 7 engineers working out of a rented storage unit. I wasn't just the legacy. I was the reason the company had a legacy. I went home, made coffee, opened my laptop, and watched the new CEO parade around the media like a rooster on a borrowed fence. His vision for the company was as thin as the PowerPoint slides someone else had clearly designed for him. He promised innovation, restructuring, cost efficiency. And then he promised layoffs, big ones, starting with obsolete roles. Obsolete. Cute. He had no idea that every restructuring over 5% required my vote. He had no idea that any termination of senior operations personnel required majority shareholder approval, another clause he had failed to read. He had no idea that the little legacy department he belittled was the cash engine that kept the company liquid year after year. He had no idea, period. So I let him talk. I let him make promises. I let him dig the hole with enthusiasm. And 3 days later, 3 days of him making public statements about cleaning house and bragging about bold leadership, I scheduled an emergency board meeting. The board chair arrived first. He looked exhausted, like a man who had spent the last 72 hours trying to wrestle a tornado into a filing cabinet. "Please tell me this meeting is what I think it is," he muttered. "Oh," I said, sipping my coffee. "It's exactly what you think it is." The CEO arrived last. He strutted in like he owned the place, completely unaware that every person in the room was watching him with the same expression you'd use when observing a toddler juggling knives. He didn't even sit down before launching into a monologue about modern transformation initiatives. I let him talk for another 2 minutes. Then I opened the folder in front of me. "Before we proceed," I said, "I'd like to reintroduce myself." He smirked. "Let me guess. You're here to complain about being terminated?" "HR can." I slid the ownership ledger across the table. He stopped talking. The board chair cleared his throat. "Meet the primary owner of this company," he said flatly. 67%, I added. Though technically, after dilution adjustments, it's closer to 71. The CEO's face drained of color so fast it was almost medical. "But, you were just an employee?" I finished. "No. I was simply working here. Ownership is something different." I watched his worldview collapse behind his eyes, like windows popping inward during a storm. "You fired me," I reminded him calmly. "On your first day. Without cause. Without approval. Without understanding the authority structure of the company you supposedly lead." He tried to speak. He couldn't. I continued, voice steady, "So today, the board and I will determine whether you remain CEO for the rest of the month, or the rest of the hour." The board took exactly 9 minutes. He didn't even last the meeting. Security escorted him out in silent humiliation, the same way he tried to escort me out 3 days earlier. When the door closed behind him, the room exhaled. The board chair looked at me. "You want the CEO position?" I shook my head. "Never. I prefer building to grandstanding." "What do you want, then?" "Simple," I said. "We restore what works. And we grow carefully. No more vanity projects. No more buzzword leadership. No more children playing executive." They agreed unanimously. As I left the building, employees stared, not with fear, but with relief. The rumor had already spread. The man the CEO fired was now the man running the company from above the CEO's chair. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. A balance had been corrected. A foolishness undone. Because here's the truth about legacy: it isn't old. It isn't obsolete. It isn't outdated. Legacy is what survives foolish leadership. Legacy is what endures. Legacy is what remains standing when the loudest voices fall silent. And in the end, the CEO didn't fire me. He introduced me to the company I already owned. The former CEO's exit created a vacuum, one that emptied the building of its arrogance but stirred up something else: fear. Not of me, exactly, but of what my presence meant. For years, executives had assumed the company was theirs to manipulate, to embellish, to gamble with. They hadn't known a silent majority owner was sitting quietly among them, watching, learning, recording every decision, every betrayal, every moment they chose flash over function. And now that I was visible, every one of them suddenly remembered the clauses they had skimmed over, the bylaws they had ignored, the ownership structure they had never bothered to study. They treated me with a kind of reverence I didn't want and a kind of caution I enjoyed more than I should have. But I didn't return to the company to punish everyone. Only the ones who deserved it. By noon the next day, I had a complete list: 43 executives and senior managers who had either supported the CEO's reckless purge or privately encouraged it in hopes of climbing upward through the wreckage. I knew their patterns, their alliances, their ambitions. I had sat quietly in meetings listening to their little political games, their whispered coup attempts, their self-serving agendas disguised as innovation. Some of them were harmless opportunists. Others were dangerous. And a few were actively malignant. I didn't storm into their offices. I didn't fire anyone on the spot. I didn't need theatrics. I simply called HR and legal into a conference room and instructed them to pull every employment agreement tied to strategic-level leadership roles. Most of those roles had clauses they didn't remember, because the former founders had built this company to protect itself from ego-driven leadership. Buried in those clauses were terms like misalignment with shareholder mandate, failure to act in the company's long-term interest, preservation of operational stability, legal gold. By the next morning, 15 executives had been removed. Not with drama. Just removed. Their badges failed at the turnstiles. Their access evaporated. HR escorted them out with polite, expressionless professionalism. The remaining 28 were invited to a performance alignment meeting. Most of them knew exactly what that meant. Some arrived sweating. Some arrived trembling. A few tried to act confident, but their eyes betrayed them. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I sat in the middle. Among them. Equal distance from everyone. "Let me be clear," I began. "This is not a purge. This is a reset. If you can contribute, stay. If you can't, leave. If you caused harm, you've already been removed." One of the senior VPs, someone who had once accused me of being stuck in the past, cleared his throat. "What exactly do you want from us?" I turned to him, slow and deliberate. I want you to stop trying to impress investors with fireworks, I said. I want you to stop reinventing wheels that aren't broken. I want you to remember that this company was built by engineers, not PowerPoints. The room was silent. Your job is simple, I continued. We rebuild. We stabilize. And then we innovate, with purpose, not ego. No one argued. No one dared. Because now they understood the truth, leadership wasn't performance. It wasn't charisma. It wasn't showmanship. It was responsibility. And I had been carrying the weight of that responsibility long before any of them had learned my name. After the meeting, employees began approaching me, not out of fear but gratitude. Stories poured out, projects sabotaged by executives chasing vanity metrics, rushed deployments that collapsed under load, budget decisions made to impress shareholders instead of serve clients. It hit me then, the company hadn't been failing. It had been suffocating under people who treated it like a stage, not a system. That evening, after everyone left, I walked through the quiet hallways, past the labs where we built our first prototypes, past the conference rooms where we argued and dreamed and nearly gave up 100 times, past the break area where we once celebrated landing our first real client. Memories lived in every corner, preserved like geological layers. And in that moment, the place felt alive again. Because with the noise gone, with the false leadership stripped away, I could finally hear it, the hum of a company ready to rise again. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was reclamation. And I wasn't done yet. The first real test came 2 weeks later, when the board forwarded me a report titled Strategic Crisis Forecast. It projected, with brutal accuracy, that if the damage from the old CEO's modernization blitz wasn't reversed within 90 days, the company would face a multi-client exodus worth nearly $300 million. It wasn't surprising. But the rate of decline was accelerating faster than even I expected. The CTO he promoted, his personal pick, had rewritten critical systems in a programming language he barely understood because it looked more futuristic. The new financial reporting pipeline had been stitched together with third-party components designed for hobby projects, not enterprise workloads. Infrastructure spending had doubled with virtually no performance benefit. It wasn't a modernization. It was a tech fashion show. And the company was bleeding because of it. So I called a meeting, not with executives, not with managers, but with the people who actually ran this place: infrastructure, security, DevOps, data architecture, engineering leads who had built the backbone that held everything together. When they walked into the room, quiet, tired, cautious, I saw the same expression on all their faces. Is this finally going to be different? I didn't sit at the head of the table. I didn't lecture. I didn't act like a savior returning from exile. I began with one sentence: tell me what's broken. For nearly an hour, the floodgates opened. They talked about delayed upgrades, ignored warnings, mismanaged budgets, rushed deployments, and executives who insisted on feature demos that weren't ready. They talked about promises made to clients without consulting engineering, about timelines fabricated to impress shareholders, about pressure to prioritize aesthetics over architecture. When they finished, the room was quiet. I said, then from now on, this company runs on truth, not performative optimism. A few people blinked. Some exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for a year. One engineer wiped her eyes. She didn't look embarrassed, she looked relieved. Then I laid out the plan: restore stability. We revert the broken systems. Legacy returns until the new infrastructure is rebuilt the right way. Rebuild trust. Engineers choose the tech stacks, not executives chasing trends. Restructure leadership. Anyone who made decisions without understanding the technology reports directly to me or not at all. Eliminate vanity projects. Every feature must serve clients or strengthen architecture. Nothing else. Empower the people who actually understand the work. Committees of senior engineers replace innovation councils run by marketing and finance. When I finished, the room wasn't silent anymore. It was alive. Not loud, not chaotic, alive in the way a machine hums when power returns to it after a blackout. By the next morning, the change was already visible. Not in dramatic press statements or flashy announcements, but in the subtler ways that matter more. Engineers stayed late, not because they were forced, but because they cared. Slack channels lit up with real collaboration instead of corporate slogans. People who had been ignored for years suddenly had decisions to make. Managers who built careers on taking credit had nothing to take anymore. And for the first time in months, outages stopped. On the third day of the rebuild, the board sent me a message: internal morale indicators are up 37% in 72 hours. That wasn't me. That was them, the people who had been stepped over, dismissed, and overshadowed by executives who couldn't write 10 lines of code. I didn't fix the company. I handed it back to the people who built it. But there was still one piece left in this revenge, one part that would tie everything together: the shareholders' meeting. The one the former CEO had been preparing for, his chance to show off his bold vision. Now it would be my turn. Not to humiliate him. Not to seek applause. But to reveal what leadership actually looked like. And to show every investor exactly who had been protecting their millions all along. The day was coming. And I was ready. The shareholders' meeting arrived like a storm, anticipated, whispered about, and carrying the kind of electricity that makes even the most seasoned executives tense. For years, this meeting had been a predictable parade of inflated numbers, rehearsed optimism, and self-congratulation. But this time everyone knew something was different. No one said it out loud, but the building felt cautious. As if the walls themselves were waiting to see what I would reveal. I didn't dress like a returning king or a triumphant conqueror. I wore the same dark blazer I'd worn on the day I was fired. The symbolism wasn't lost on the few employees who recognized it. More than one nodded quietly as I passed, like they were witnessing a man bury a ghost. Inside the auditorium, the lights dimmed as shareholders filled their seats. Analysts. Investors. Retirees. Early employees. Venture capitalists. People who had only ever known numbers, not the work behind them. The board chair opened the meeting. He looked composed, but his tone had weight. This year's presentation will be different. We will not be showcasing projections. We will be showcasing the truth. A murmur rippled across the room. The chair stepped aside and gestured for me. I walked up to the stage, not slow, not dramatic, just steady. The kind of steady that comes from knowing exactly what must be done. The screen behind me lit up with a chart. Not a growth graph. Not revenue forecasts. Not branding slides. Rather, a simple timeline showing exactly when a company began to fail. The week I was fired. I didn't mention the former CEO by name. I didn't need to. I spoke plainly, without theatrics. 3 weeks ago, the company drifted toward collapse. Not because of market forces or competition. Because of decisions made by people who did not understand the systems they were trying to change. I clicked to the next slide: outage logs, cost overruns, client churn risk. These failures weren't caused by technology. They were caused by ego. I looked out at the audience. They weren't angry, they were attentive. Investors crave confidence, but they trust clarity more. I continued, you were told the company needed modernization. That legacy systems were the problem. That the solution was restructuring and rapid innovation. Another slide. This time showing comparative data, legacy stability versus new system failures. That narrative was false. There was a quiet gasp somewhere in the back. Now I revealed what truly mattered. 3 decades ago, when this company was 6 people with more hope than funding, we created a structure to protect it from reckless leadership. Another slide, ownership structure, confidential trust diagram. A diagram that clearly showed my 67% voting control. Whispers shot through the room like sparks. It was our safeguard. Our dead man's switch. If leadership ever threatened the company's foundation, ownership would intervene. Then I delivered the pivot, the part they needed most, and I am here today not as an executive, but as that safeguard. The room fell quiet. I explained the recovery steps, how engineering was rebuilding systems the right way, how spending was being reined in, how client confidence was returning, how internal morale had surged. Every slide was evidence. Every point was anchored in fact, not vision, not hype. Then came the moment that cemented everything. There will be no new CEO until the company stabilizes. Executive decisions now require majority shareholder approval. Which means my approval. Not a threat. A promise. A protection. What happened next surprised even me. The audience stood. Not all at once, but in waves, investors, engineers, early employees, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Not cheering. Respecting. Because in that moment, they understood something the former CEO never did. I wasn't here to lead a revolution. I was here to preserve a legacy. One I built. One they invested in. One that would outlive all of us. After the meeting ended, the board chair placed a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't just save the company," he said quietly. "You reminded everyone what it actually is." But as I stepped outside, feeling the weight of the past weeks finally ease off my chest, I realized something larger. This wasn't vindication. Wasn't revenge. Wasn't even justice. It was restoration. A return of the company to its rightful trajectory, not guided by flash or ego or theatrics, but by the quiet, enduring work that had kept it alive for decades. And for the first time since being fired on day one, I felt something warm settle into place inside me. Not triumph. Not dominance. Just peace. Because the company was safe again. And because legacy, when built right, is never obsolete. In the weeks that followed the shareholders' meeting, the company felt different, lighter, clearer, grounded in a way it hadn't been in years. Rumors died quietly. Politics evaporated. Meetings stopped being battlegrounds and became work sessions again. Every department, engineering, finance, support, product, started rolling in the same direction. Not because of fear. Because for the first time in a long time, people trusted the foundation beneath them. Occasionally, someone would ask what became of the former CEO. The answer didn't matter. Titles vanish. Influence fades. But damage? That can be undone if the right people are willing to rebuild. One evening, long after most had gone home, I walked the quiet halls again. The lights hummed softly overhead. Screens glowed with late-night commits and project dashboards. A handful of engineers nodded at me as they passed, not with the stiff politeness they'd once used around executives, but with relaxed, genuine acknowledgement. Colleagues. Partners. Builders. I stopped outside the old office I used to sit in before everything exploded. The nameplate had been replaced with a blank one. Not mine. Not his. A clean slate. I didn't take it back. I didn't need to. I had outgrown that room years ago. Instead, I took the elevator to the roof. The city below flickered with 1,000 lights, restless and shimmering. 30 years ago, I had stood on that same roof, a younger man with more ideas than resources, promising myself that one day the company would stand on its own, protected, principled, resilient. It had wavered. It had stumbled. It had nearly fallen. But it stood. Not because of revenge. Not because of a power play. Not even because of the 67% ownership buried deep in the bylaws. It stood because when the moment came, I remembered exactly why we built this place in the first year, to make something that mattered. Something that endured. Something worth defending. My firing had been a spark. My return had been a reckoning. But this calm, this stability, this quiet sense of correctness, this was the real victory. As the wind moved across the rooftop, I breathed in the cool night air and let the past settle behind me. The miscalculations of the arrogant. The politics of the ambitious. The blindness of those who confused noise with leadership. They were footnotes now. The company was on the right path again. My legacy, not the outdated one they mocked, but the real one, was alive and thriving. And walking back toward the elevator, I felt something I hadn't felt since the very first days of the company's creation: hope. Not for revenge. Not for control. But for the future, finally in the hands of people who deserved it. The end.